This is a conversation with Hans Nelson about Palantir, X, Optimus, Mars, FSD, and other things. Enjoy. So let's just jump into it. So, what is your story, Hans? When did you start investing in Tesla? What's your first memory of hearing about like a Model S or a Roadster?
So it's kind of a long story. I originally heard of Elon. I think my best memory is there was somebody that I was going to school with in 2013 who was just like diehard wanted to go work at SpaceX, and I had another friend who wanted to go work at Boeing, and they actually both got jobs. One went and worked at Boeing, and the other one actually just now finally um, left SpaceX after I guess he would have been there for at least 8 years, and he left as, like, a senior engineering project manager. Um, and so that was I didn't really know a whole lot about who Elon was. I obviously knew about PayPal, but I had no idea who any of the PayPal mafia people were yet. Then I had another person that I went to school who was diehard, wanted to own a Model 3 and had pre-ordered it as soon as it came out, and that was, um, somewhere around the same time. And so that was kind of the first like SpaceX and Tesla got on the radar for me, but I didn't really know anything more about it than that. And in 2012, just before that, I had left the corporate world to go back to school to work on a graduate degree, and which I didn't end up completing. But it was also in mechanical engineering, and I had rolled over at that time a my 401k plan into an IRA. And so I was self-managing all of my retirement, which was, not very much. It was a few $1,000s. And so I was investing for the first time, and I was trying to follow a Dave Ramsey approach to diversification and domestic and growth and some international and kind of all focused on mutual funds. And didn't have a whole lot of understanding fundamentally, and also then didn't see a whole lot of success on the back end of that. And so after having been kind of introduced to the idea of Tesla and SpaceX in, yeah, I think 2014, I also ended up investing a little bit of my portfolio in Google somewhere around that time. And it didn't take long, I think 6 months to a year for that position to triple. They gave me like that first taste of a single stock pick being able to just eviscerate the returns that I was capable of getting with mutual funds. And so that kind of set me down the rabbit hole. And um, I remember, I don't know how I just happened to come across an article in the little Apple investment thing on this crazy person who had the best performing fund of the last like quarter, and it was Kathy Wood, and she actually at the time had exposure to Bitcoin in one of her ETFs. And so primarily the performance of that ETF had been driven by the rise in Bitcoin. And so that kind of got me hooked onto ARK Invest and their research. Um, and that was where I started to get a little bit more on Elon. And then that led me to start researching him. And so I started watching interviews. I read everything. That was like right around the same time that Tim Urban came out with his whole Musk post series that was basically like a book where he went into Tesla, he went into SpaceX, he went into Neuralink. He did a special deep dive on just the way that Elon thinks called The Chef and His Secret Sauce, which was an incredible diagnosis of the way that Elon solves problems and breaks things down and thinks from first principles. And at that point, with my engineering background, I realized that he was a one of a kind engineer and innovator, and that he not only had the technical chops, but then he had the business sense to back it up. And that was really a unique thing. And his ability to execute those things at scale. Um, I was a little bit nervous to invest in Tesla for a while still because the Model 3 ramp was basically chaos and not working well. And so it was finally when they, I think, reached volume production on the Model 3 that I dipped my toes in the water and began buying, and then just accumulated significantly more over the next year. And so that's the majority of my Tesla position was built between 2018 and 2019.
Okay, got it. Yeah. They were almost in bankruptcy. They were like the most heavy shorted stock on the market. And I'm just reading in the biography because I didn't invest till 2019. And I was reading about before that when Musk was accusing some Thai driver of being a pedophile. And he apparently got promiscuous with an attendant on his plane. Um, did you read about that?
Yeah, so that was an accusation that, as far as we know, hasn't been substantiated about the thing on the plane. Yeah, I remember the deal with the diver in Thailand. I was a shareholder then, and I was a shareholder through the whole 420 private thing and all of that volatility. Yeah, it was a crazy, rough time there for a little while.
So, what was going through your mind when 2020 came around and then things were starting to look good, but then COVID came all the way back down? Did you ever think about selling during the COVID, or did you just decide
I
to stay
didn't think
strong?
about it. I did it, and I like, it's one of my biggest investing mistakes, and so I was managing a cleaning company, and I knew based on the business that we were in and a lot of the things that I was hearing from people in cleaning and sanitation that this was gonna be a long haul thing. They were trying to tell us that this is, a couple weeks and then we're done. I was like, "No, that's not, like, we're gonna be in this." So I knew in March of 2020 that this was gonna be at least a year, if not longer. And so I assumed that that was gonna have direct correlation to the markets, and that I was like, "I'll just be better off selling now." Like, we've already taken some losses, but it's okay. Like, I'll sell now, I'll wait a little while, and then I'll pile back in. And I'm really not a swing trader. I don't try to time the markets, but I thought I had a piece of insider information that gave me an edge, and so I went ahead and I sold everything. I went from complete stock position to a complete cash position. Um, they just, like, literally within weeks of that, the Fed announced that they were turning on the money printer, and the stock market went straight up like a rocket. And I missed out on a little bit of the gains there at first. But the one thing that I did well in all of that was I went ahead and reallocated all my cash back into stocks within, I think, maybe a month to month and a half of selling.
Oh yeah,
So I just took my lumps like a man. Like, I made a mistake. I went back in. And so, yeah, like, if I had maintained the original position that I had in March of 2020, I think my portfolio would be at least double what it is now. But, I also went back in, and I could have never reallocated, and I could be at, a tenth of what I am right now too. So, six of one, half dozen of the other. And it's one of those things that you just have to learn from experience. Um, and it wasn't that I ever lost faith in Elon's ability to manage the business through all that. I just thought that I had a piece of insight on the macro environment that was actionable that I could use. And in retrospect, I didn't really understand macro hardly at all. Like, that's one of the great things about the last 3 years is that we have gotten an incredible crash course on the importance of interest rates, the importance of quantitative tightening and quantitative easing, like the bond markets, like all of this stuff that a lot of seasoned investors know very well from experience. Younger investors like us have actually gotten to now develop that experience in a very compressed way.
definitely. And I don't even think any of us could have foreseen how Musk was going to navigate that time because he questions every requirement and he was like, no, we're not shutting down the factory. We're going to keep operating. And so even through that time, we got to learn more about how Musk handles tough situations. And so fast forward to, the beginning of 2023, and you have a war going on in Ukraine and a possible recession and the stock plummets to $100. Did you feel like during that time you learned from how you manage your portfolio in 2020, and then what did you do in 2023?
Yeah, so I made some more mistakes in 2023, but different ones that I also learned from. And so it was kind of the reverse. I actually, for the first time ever, was starting to use margin in 2023. And so as it dropped from 300s down into the 250s, I started buying. We had sold a house, and so I had a cash position. Then I was wanting to put it in Tesla, and instead of dollar cost averaging into it, as soon as I had it in hand, I went ahead and put it all in at one time, and then I was like, oh man, 255, like this is crazy good price. And so I started to borrow, and just a little bit of margin, like not hardly any margin at all. I think maybe 15 percent was all that I had above the original position. And well, as the stock continued to go lower and lower and lower, it really, I think between 150 and 100, ended up having to liquidate some of my original position in order to cover my margin calls. And so I ended up with a smaller position than I had original. Like if I had just purchased 100% cash, I would have been able to hold those stocks all the way through that time. I did hold everything that I could all the way through that time. I was just sad that as the market presented me an incredible opportunity to lower my cost basis, that instead of being able to buy, I was having to sell. And so that was a hard lesson, but definitely. And I knew, and yeah, like going back to the lessons that I had learned from 2020, I knew that Tesla would manage through that. I know that they're going to continue to manage through that. I had zero loss of faith or conviction in Tesla as an investment case. But I wasn't in a position to do the things that I wanted to do because I had made some mistakes and the risks that I had exposed myself to.
Well, thanks for being candid about your mistakes. I think the fact that you're so willing to share them is going to pay dividends for you in the long run. And if you're willing to continue to learn, then I think you're going to get wiser and wiser as time goes on. And what would you say long-term is like the opportunity at Tesla that you're most excited about and the reason that you continue to hold?
So this is one of the things that Dave Lee hammers that, I think people are very wise to learn. And that is that the TAM, the size of the fishbowl that the company that you're investing in is going after, is an incredibly important thing to factor in. And so this is one of the reasons why, I'm not 100% Tesla. That's like by far my largest position. It's probably got to be at least 80%, if not more. But I do invest in other things, and it's primarily because of what you were talking about. I want to continue to learn how to invest. And so going through the experiences of being invested in other companies or other mutual funds or ETFs, that I learn things through those investment vehicles that I don't learn investing in Tesla. And so even though honestly, I think I could probably get a better risk adjusted return being 100% Tesla, I don't do that because I don't like the opportunity cost of learning through some of those other things is not one that I'm willing to pay. And so Palantir is one of the positions that I have, and I love Palantir. I think that there's a lot of growth that they have ahead of them. But when I step back and I evaluate Palantir compared to Tesla, it's two different possibility sets. Palantir can grow a lot, but they're never going beyond, at least based on the rhetoric that I hear coming out of management, they're never going beyond a pure software play. And, whether they will ever even move far enough down market to reach end consumers is questionable. Like the primary customer base that they are pursuing is at least, medium business and above into Fortune 500. And so enterprise is, the main customer base. They want to do more than just enterprise. But that's like a relatively limited thing. And, AI has the ability to massively expand the capabilities of their system, the usefulness of their products, the economic case of what they're doing. But it still is a service business to, it's a platform for business. Now, if you take that, that's big, but if you compare that to Tesla, the markets that they're pursuing with products that they either have in the market right now or products that they're very transparent about that are in development, they're pursuing the global transportation market, the global energy market, which is the largest market in the world, and then labor. Those are incredible size markets. And oh, by the way, they just happen to have one of the world's best artificial intelligence teams. A lot of people want to say that Palantir is an AI play, and it is, But the AI team inside of Palantir, I would not put up against the AI team that Tesla has. And so, I think that AI is going to be one of the defining value creation technologies of the next 50, 100 years. And when I look at Tesla and I look at Palantir, I say Palantir has a play there, but Tesla's actually stronger. And so relatively, I'm going to allocate a lot more of my money to Tesla. And so that's really, even though the valuations are significantly different between Palantir and Tesla at this point in time, I think that overall size market that Tesla is pursuing is definitely a reason to justify, and the history of execution that they have being able to make physical products and scale physical products is so hard, and their ability to do that is incredibly impressive. And so that's kind of where it breaks down for me.
Cool. So when I did my research on Palantir, it was about a year ago, and I understand they're a big data company, but the video that I saw that they presented was like them offering defense services to the government and providing software solutions for a lot of military operations. And to me, it looked like super crazy and futuristic. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, I don't get I don't understand how this scales, because they're getting like these big contracts to governments, but I was failing to see where it was headed. And so I tweeted out a month ago, I was like, can someone help me understand Palantir more and what the long-term horizon is? And you said that it might not be able to get to consumers because it's just like the mid Fortune 500 companies. But can you, if you can, explain what exactly Palantir offers?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not anywhere close to the best person to do this, just because I don't allocate nearly enough time to fully understand the Palantir bull case. Like I said, since to me it doesn't seem as compelling as Tesla, I also don't allocate as much research to it as I do to Tesla. That said, I feel like I have a decent understanding of the company and a decent understanding of the bull case, and this is how I would couch it. So Palantir has been developing a platform that is an operating system for businesses. It's not really an operating system for businesses, it's an operating system for organizations and institutions. Um, the government sector has been the sandbox that they have used to develop this system for the last 15 years now. Actually, I think longer than that. I think they were founded in 2002, so almost 20. They went through a significant number of pivots in the early days, but the core goal of what their product aims to provide is to streamline and simplify the ability of decision makers within an organization to use the best data that's available in their organization to make the best decision possible as quickly as possible. And so, if you've worked inside of a large organization, you understand how hard it is to get actionable information from the person at the edge of the organization who comes in contact with that information first to the actual person who makes a decision. And that is a problem that Palantir is actually really, really good at solving. And if you think about a military operation where there are frontline soldiers that they are coming into contact with actionable intelligence that a general in the Pentagon needs to know, and they need to know that ASAP. Like, that is one of the most highly critical use cases that you could possibly have for the importance of being able to filter through a massive amount of information all at the same time, distill out of that what is salient and needs to be transmitted to an actual decision maker, or whether or not to just push that to actually push the decision making back to the person in the field at the edge, instead of giving some information back up the chain to someone who needs to make an executive decision on something, or just say, hey, actually, that doesn't have to go back up the chain. You can act on this piece of intelligence right here at the edge without that information having to go anywhere. But we do want command to be informed of that, and so we're going to pass that along to it. But you have the actual ability to make your action decision right now based on the situation that's presented with you. So that competency that ability is something that all organizations need, not just in the defense sector, not just in the government sector, but also in the private sector. And so they developed this platform there. Once they had their MVP built out, they had a really good backend infrastructure that did, the other thing about not only the importance of the use case in the defense scenario that's important is the privacy and security. Like, you can't be sharing national security secrets with people who can't see national security secrets. And so that privacy piece is something that they had to get right from the beginning to operate in the defense sector. But it's also something that's incredibly important in the corporate world for things like IT or information security, InfoSec. And so that piece is something that they already had developed. Now they're working on just continuing to adapt what they've built, or they're starting kind of like Tesla did at the top end of the funnel. Think of the government business as the Roadster, and then think of Fortune 500 level enterprise customers as the Model S. And then the Model 3 would be moving down into middle sized businesses. And then if they can ever get to the end consumer, that would be basically the analogy of the $25,000 car for Tesla. As they've done all of that, obviously the technology landscape around them has shifted. And so they're continuing to incorporate new technologies as they develop, like LLMs are a great example. But because they had a lot of the outside infrastructure, I think they do have a unique position within the space of artificial intelligence applied to enterprise companies, because they have figured out the challenges that surround incorporating an LLM. A lot of companies, they say, hey, you cannot use, as an employee of this Fortune 500 company, you can't go on to ChatGPT and start asking it questions, because we don't know what the security is of the data that you're giving into it. And that, there are already examples of proprietary company information that has been absorbed by various types of chatbots and then gets regurgitated out to people that are outside of that organization. That's a challenge that makes adopting LLMs, which are incredibly powerful technology, in that enterprise setting. But the infrastructure that Palantir has enables them to be very specific about the information that an LLM is allowed to have access to versus not have access to, where that information is then able to, like, who an individual chatbot is able to communicate with. And so you can set up your guardrails and your boundaries to protect the organization and the intellectual property of the organization in a way that actually makes it adoptable, the enterprise level, in ways that just something out of the box from OpenAI is not going to be.
Well, yeah, I've never been given a summary of Palantir that I could understand, but I appreciate that, because AI is penetrating so many industries. It's penetrating healthcare and finance and transportation, and people that are working in these industries going forward are going to have to be willing to work alongside AI. But at Palantir, it sounds like it's also helping them make, like commanders, make real-time decisions that influence a lot of people's lives. So these people that are working at these agencies have to be willing to work with AI and be able to interpret the data that it outputs as fast as possible. And I could see why that's helpful, because the video I saw, it just looks super like Star Trek or whatever. But I guess it is getting to that point. And
this is typically something that's called business intelligence in the corporate world. And, business intelligence is a huge industry in and of itself. And so that's not necessarily something that's new. But Palantir has actually created a pretty innovative and powerful streamlined product in that space that I think is differentiated from anything else in business intelligence. It's better than Oracle. It's better than any other ERP system that I've ever seen or encountered. There's lots of SaaS products that are kind of standalone things. And a lot of those things are actually plug and play with Palantir. So instead of solving a small part of a problem, a big part of what Palantir has done is they've gone down to the very base layer of an actual developing of an operating system for the business that then you can, plug and play or drop different pieces on top of, that would replace, something like, SAP was the one that I was looking for. So SAP is like a huge Fortune 500 enterprise resource planning software stack. And so, Palantir is actually, with their Foundry platform, a superior product, in my opinion, by far and away to something like SAP, and then gives the company a lot more digitally native ways to interact with their data and their business than something like SAP would.
Okay. And from before, you're saying that Palantir is hesitant to use LLMs because they have to protect their data. And I wanted to take that opportunity to transition to talk about Optimus. Do you think Optimus will be equipped with LLMs? I know Elon Musk has said that that could be a possibility, but if you have an Optimus in your house or your factory and you're asking questions, that's also a scary data breach for people. And do you know of anything that Tesla can do to prevent the spread of data and how LLMs could work in Optimus?
Yeah, so there's an LLM, and the way that an LLM is trained are, two different things. So at its core, any of these large neural nets, whether its architecture is a generatively pre-trained transformer, that's what GPT stands for. That's one arrangement and architecture of a neural net that is currently used. So that's what ChatGPT is built on, and then GPT-3, GPT-4, which are the basis that ChatGPT actually operates on top of. Those systems, you take basically the entire internet worth of text, and you feed it into the training data of a system, and you give that set of neurons, you tell it to look at a block of text, and then you cover individual words or maybe individual phrases, maybe even individual sentences or whole paragraphs. And you say, hey, based on reading the whole corpus of text on the internet, please predict what's inside of those blank spaces. And you know the right answer to what's supposed to be in those blank spaces. When it gets it wrong, you spank the LLM and say, no, that was bad. And it goes through and it tries to figure out, hey, where do I need to make little adjustments somewhere in all of these neurons to give the right answer? And you do that over and over and over again. And so that data, though, that is used to train on is all done in the cloud. So that's not done on the device locally. And so currently there's not a lot of on-device training that's done. And so if you prevent the edge device, so think about this is something that Apple currently implements in at least at one level with the iPhone, that most of the information that your iPhone is interacting with you specifically right there on the device stays locally, and it doesn't get sent back to Apple in the cloud, or if it does, it's stripped of any identifying information before it is sent to the cloud. And so that makes it difficult for them to do anything that's suspect from a privacy or security standpoint with data that originates from you directly. So I think Tesla can do something similar, and then the Optimus absolutely will. They are already trained. A lot of even the things that we're finding about these GPT architectures that have been great in the language model setting is that they're also good at other things. They are actually multimodal. They're good. You can use a GPT neural net trained on video data, and it does very well at predicting video data. You can do the same for audio. And so that same architecture, while it wouldn't necessarily be called an LLM if it's applied to a non-language information mode, it still works. And so we're finding this actually in robotics control. And that was one of the things that they talked about when they said that the Optimus video of sorting the blocks was completely video in to controls out. My read on that was that they're actually, well, and they also about being able to prompt, like you could tell it with the same neural net, you could tell it to sort or unsort the blocks. You could give it instructions. And that giving it instructions has to be happening in some sort of a language interface. And so that tells me that they're like it's attached in some way or contains within itself a specific language um, understanding and an actual LLM of some sort. So whether that is the whole thing is an LLM that is trained on multimodal data to be able to respond both to language and to video and other sensory input data, or if they just took an LLM and bolted it onto the side of another GPT neural net that was tasked with just the motor movements and the control input and output, or sensory input and control output. I don't really know. I don't think anyone outside of Tesla right now knows what that is, but we do know that they have some ability to interact with the bot from a linguistic perspective. And so, yeah, that is part of Optimus, and it's going to continue to be a bit like the UI problem of Optimus is a whole lot easier to do. If you can show Optimus something, but also talk to it and interact with it like you would a person. And so, if you want these things to be working in a factory, you want them to do something useful, you want to be able to bring it to where you want it to work, show it what you want it to do, and have it actually take that on. That does get back to what we were talking about earlier with the security. Like, if you don't want that information then to be transferred back to the cloud and be able to train the fleet, like if you want that learning to be something that stays there locally with that bot and doesn't get transferred to either that specific bot, or maybe you want to teach your fleet of bots a specific task, but you don't want that necessarily to go back to Tesla. They have to solve the ability to do that. And I think that an app store architecture is something that looks likely, and not only likely but also desirable in this context, that you could teach skills to an Optimus bot, and then if you don't want that to be something that's disseminated to the fleet, like you have that ability to keep that back. But if you also wanted to be compensated for, like someone could download your hamburger flipping Optimus app like into their robots, and then they would pay you a subscription fee or pay a one-time fee for something similar. um, and the same architecture that would track and pay for and monetize and give attribution to the creator of different skills that an Optimus bot could have, would also give you the ability to do all the privacy and security to prevent it from being used in any way that you don't want it to be used.
Okay, so yeah, I think Tesla has said that it has an onboard computer, and so everything Tesla can be intelligent without being connected to the internet, and so it can be in your house, and it could see a bad behavior like an owner hitting their wife or kicking their dog, and that video does not have to get uploaded to the cloud. So it's not necessary that an Optimus sees something bad and then all Optimus bots see something bad at the same time. So I actually just heard Omar from Whole Mars Catalog talking about how FSD is trained, and he said that they might have a problem where foliage is covering a stop sign, and so they can create a new neural network, and they scour the fleet, whether it's full self-driving cars or not full self-driving cars, for cars that see a stop sign with foliage, and then they tell that car to basically record that moment, and then they wait until the car gets back to a house with Wi-Fi to upload that to the neural network so that cars can get better at maneuvering when there's a stop sign with foliage. And so when you think about scaling Optimus and having it learn as fast as possible, you suggested an app store is maybe the most desirable way to do that, and I probably agree. But when I saw the Apple Vision Pro, it made me think about using that to record the video that you need, because we saw in that Optimus update video they have a camera on the top of their head, and that's how they record applicable data for Optimus to use. And so, do you think developers on the App Store will use cameras like that, or do you think that there's actually not that many tasks that we need to train Optimus on? There might be 100 that we use, and do you think that Tesla's developers could all handle that themselves?
I think that if you want a robotic platform to be able to be flexible and adaptable enough to fit into even 10% of the use cases of work that humans do, that is such a large task that it's going to require a lot of hands-on human labor to get robots to do that well. Um, and I could be wrong here. Like, it depends on how much general intelligence, really not even general intelligence, like how much super intelligence kind of the platform ends up with. Because you can think about, humans are incredibly generally intelligent beings, and we still have to learn how to do specific tasks. Um, and we typically get taught by someone who has already gone through the pain of learning how to do that thing well. And so there's a certain amount of intelligence that we might have to be able to apply to improving that process, but we still also need training. And so I think it's unrealistic and unreasonable to expect that that will not also be the case for even a very, very intelligent form of Optimus. And there are so many different individual use cases out there that, um, yeah, it's like there's no general model that knows how to do all of those tasks proficiently out of the box. Um, the one thing that Optimus has going for it is that once it learns a task, it is possible, depending on the mechanisms that are in place, theoretically, for all Optimus bots to be able to learn to do that thing. And so, it doesn't have to learn everything in each individual bot. The fleet has to learn it. And so that fleet learning is very powerful, but there's still a lot of individuals that are going to be involved in at least the first iteration of that specific training of at least one bot on a specific task. And that's where, that App Store model is the best incentive to then generate all of that diversified training that ends up being valuable to the fleet.
Yeah, and these Optimus bots can get intelligent really, really fast. And I'm going to share my screen with you because I saw a tweet from Jason DeBolt about the possibility of them becoming conscious. And are you able to see my screen here?
Yep.
I'm just going to read it, and I want to get your thoughts on this. He says, maybe consciousness only arises in AI robots that can move around the real world and not in AIs without bodies that live in a data center, such as an LLM. It's possible that there are some fundamental rules of consciousness that we don't yet understand, and two of those rules could be: one, you must have a physical body, and two, you must see yourself as a separate entity from other objects in the real world. When an AI is completely self-contained in a body and can use its own senses to observe the limits of its existence, they may see their legs and their arms. The need for survival and self-preservation arises, and the need for survival gives rise to a low, primitive level of consciousness. A small neural net responsible for keeping the robot safe could act as a seed of AI consciousness. I see no such need for a neural net on an AI running in a data center since it has no control over its own survival.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting, this is a point of contention and debate within the AI community. And I think it really comes down to definitions of what consciousness is, but I tend to lean in the direction that Jason is leaning on this. And this understanding is really rooted in just evolutionary biology. We don't have a proof case that you can have a conscious, intelligent being that has not been shaped by the need to manage its survival. And so, if you say that survival of the fittest is the organizing principle that creates all of the life that we observe here on Earth, then it's really pretty much a logical conclusion from that premise that, that need for survival is an inseparable part of a consciousness that actually approximates the consciousness that we as humans or any of the other beings that we view as living have. Um, and so, yeah, that's if you're proposing a model that doesn't follow from that, you're really rejecting the premise that survival of the fittest is what has produced all life as we know it.
So yeah, and Elon has said before that he thinks that the chance of AI becoming conscious is greater than 0%. And even in Jason's tweet here at the end, he writes, a small neural net responsible for keeping the robots safe could act as a seed of AI consciousness. So do you think that it could be unsafe for Tesla to put a small neural net responsible for keeping the robot safe? Because imagine like you're hanging out with your robot and maybe your fridge is about to fall on you, and the robot, or maybe something bigger, like you guys are walking past a train and like you're about to get hit by the train, and you would want your robot to like push you out of the way and give its own life. But if it has that small neural net that's actually acting as a limbic system, that could give that robot the urge to not do that and protect its own life. And how do you, what does that make you think about? Like, do you think that these robots should like be wired to protect their owner? Like, how does that work?
A lot of really smart people have thought about this for a long time. This is really where Asimov's 3 laws of robotics come from. The conception is that you don't want the robots that we make to have zero care for their own physical body and to do things that end up getting them destroyed. But at the same time, you want them to prioritize the well-being of humans over the well-being of robots. And so that's where the 3 laws really come from. I don't know. I think that there is definitely a possibility that Jason is correct, that even something like the 3 laws actually is the seed of AI is becoming conscious in some way, shape, or form. We don't really know what consciousness is, honestly. And so it's hard to define if that's something that will or will not give robots consciousness. And then there's also a question of whether robots having consciousness is or is not a bad thing. And it's really just uncharted territory all the way around. I would say that if we can make robots cheaply, and it doesn't matter if they get destroyed without giving them some sort of limbic system, just because we have the wealth and resources and abundance just to deal with that problem and not give them a limbic system, that it potentially prevents a lot of other scary unintended consequences that we can't think through the implications of. That being said, I just don't see, at the beginning, there's no way to get to that end state where we have that type of resources and wealth and abundance that doesn't start with an initial manufacturing ramp, low numbers of initial production, proof cases. And so I just like, in the landscape of different robotics companies that are making artificially intelligent robots to do useful tasks in the real world, whether Tesla does this or not, I feel like it's inevitable that some of the companies are going to impart some sort of a limbic system. And so it's almost something that doesn't matter to ask the question, is it a good thing or a bad thing to give robots a limbic system? It's a thing that is going to happen, and we are going to have to wrestle with the downstream consequences of that. And that's kind of, unfortunately, I think, where like not everyone is going to think through all of those questions before they start building something. And so, yeah, we're just going to have to figure out how to survive and thrive in a world where that happens anyways.
Yeah, you're right, because there's a shortage of labor. And so we do actually need these robots, and we need them now. People, I don't think, seem to realize that. And it's been really, really difficult to get people to transition to electric vehicles. So how difficult do you think it's going to be to get people to transition to Optimus?
The economics are going to force the issue over a long enough time frame. It's not going to matter how much people are not on board with that idea. Um, this is one of the things that Tim Urban does a really great job of explaining in throughout the whole Post series, but especially in The Chef and His Secret Sauce, that the economic forcing function is a core piece of what Elon understands. And when he creates a business, the business is founded on transforming the economic model. And so, it doesn't matter how much we want to pursue sustainable energy if the economics of the technology that we have to pursue sustainable energy are not in and of themselves sustainable, the system's not sustainable. And so you have to fix the economics first and make a compelling product with economics that work, and then the change is inevitable. So that's what he did with the electric vehicle. That's what he has done with, reusable rockets in space exploration. And that is what he's doing when it comes to Tesla bot and automated labor and whatever this artificial intelligence that he's building, whatever the ceiling of that is, whether it is general intelligence, whether it's super intelligence. Those things are radical disruptions and transformations to the economic landscape that create unavoidable transformation in the entire world economy and the entire structure of human society.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that the transition at the factory and industrial level will be swift. But sometimes I get up in the night, I'm going to the bathroom, and I just think if there was an Optimus bot standing in the hallway in the darkness as I went to the bathroom, it would just be the scariest sight ever.
It would be
And
weird.
so I think the transition at the homeowner level could be slower, but as that app store gets going and it becomes more useful, I think it will be inevitable as well.
I definitely agree with that as far as the home, like individuals. The core of the economic use case is in business and industry. And so businesses and industries are going to be willing and able to pay a lot more for bots than individuals will be able to. And so there will be like an entire kind of behind the curtain transformation of the labor that's occurring that won't necessarily be visible in people's homes at the same time. Like, I think that will change in people's homes over time as well, but that'll take much longer. A lot of the shift in productivity and labor and the economy and just how all this stuff gets made will actually happen, in factories before it ever gets to people's homes.
Okay, and then so Optimus is going to be put in Starship and flown to Mars and potentially hundreds of them, and they'll be operated from Earth as they create a settlement on Mars for Elon to follow and to get it ready to get farming going and shelter going so that humans can follow, and then humans will be multiplanetary, and then if something happens to Earth, human consciousness and civilization will go on. And so my question to you is, let's say the settlement gets going on Mars, and then, you know, Elon and a couple of his family members and friends and engineers go with him, and they start the early stages of Mars. How do you think that's going to look politically? Do you think Elon would plant the American flag on Mars, or how do you think that will play out in terms of real estate and ownership?
Yeah. So I think honestly, this is probably the entire reason that the Optimus program exists. Elon has said that in order for a colony on Mars to be self-sustaining, you need 1 million people, and like he's thought through the timeline of how long it's going to take to convince 1 million people to move there, and do that. And the atmosphere is difficult. Like if you're going to have 1 million people, then you need to have the infrastructure in place to support the life of 1 million people. And, obviously on Mars, we don't have a breathable atmosphere. So there's a lot of infrastructure. You've got to have, your habitats, and you're probably building a lot of underground shelter to shield people from radiation and like all this stuff. But an Optimus bot doesn't care about a breathable atmosphere. And it also probably is a lot more resilient to radiation than a human body. It can do all kinds of things on the surface that would be useful and extremely dangerous for a human to do on Mars. And so, I think that having a self-sustaining colony that has humans in it, but is populated by a large number of bots as well, is something that happens a lot faster than if you are trying to get that colony self-sustaining just with humans. And so I don't know if it's, a happy accident that is the case, or if the Optimus development is, was seeded in a need to try and accelerate that as much as possible from the get-go. To answer your question on the ownership of Mars, like I think that Elon has his own thoughts about how to organize and manage and do all the politics that are required. Like, I first of all, I don't think that anything that far away, just like England was not able to manage owning what became the United States in the 1700s and 1800s because they were just too far away. And I think that same type of dynamic is also very difficult on Mars. And honestly, like, if you're going to Mars, you're going to Mars so that you can get away from all of the political structures that we have here and the way that we do things here. Like, you want to go build something new. So I also think it's hard to imagine people that are going to Mars just being okay with being owned by the United States. Like, yeah, that also is hard. So I think ideally, and I think that Elon would agree with this, Mars is its own sovereign, self-sustaining, and self-governing colony, and that whatever they do beyond that is kind of up to them. And it's an opt-out. Like, if I'm going to Mars, I'm saying I'm not an American anymore. I'm not a Russian. I'm not a um, Colombian or English or French or whatever. Like, now I'm a Martian, and I'm going to do whatever Martians do. So, yeah, and a lot of people have put forward theories that I'm not sure what to make of, but are definitely feasible. That part of the reason for him Elon has talked a lot about doing electronically intermediated direct democracy with a platform like X. And so it could be that was part of the motivating factor that led him to purchase Twitter in the first place and develop it. That you can do governance in a more digitally native 21st century model in a completely different way than the framers of the Constitution of the United States were able to architect in the 1700s. So, yeah. And then, if America doesn't like it, like, I don't know, America doesn't have SpaceX. Like, SpaceX is a private company. The only way that this whole thing gets going is because of the ability of SpaceX to transport all the cargo from here to there. Like, that is not property of the United States. I don't know how the United States military, like, logistically and from a power projection standpoint, can affect the surface of Mars on a way that even, approximates 1 or 2% of SpaceX's ability to do that without completely requisitioning their entire infrastructure. That whole power dynamic between Elon and the United States government is a difficult thing to play out because they need him at the same time as they may not like him. Basically, all of Space Force is going to have a huge dependence on SpaceX, and already does. Starlink, we've seen how that has held up in Ukraine in comparison to all of the other telecommunications networks that existed in Ukraine that the Defense Department relied upon. And so, if SpaceX can turn off all of their critical infrastructure, if they were to be attacked by the United States, then, like, SpaceX holds a lot of cards and a lot of ability to, stand up against power grabs and unhealthy, inauthentic exercises of authority that really just don't make sense. So, yeah, but it's all interesting, like, thought processes and scenarios. Like, there's a lot of wargaming that goes on at that level. And yeah, I just don't know how our current Defense Department is going to treat all that. The other question is there any even political desire for the United States to own Mars or any other nations? I'm sure if China and the US were trying to compete against each other for status, that might be a prize that they would compete over, which makes it kind of a scary thought. Um, and yeah, I think at the end of the day, then it'll come down to who is the most technically competent and powerful entity. And I think that still comes away being SpaceX. Like, SpaceX is more competent in space than the United States, and it's more competent in space than China. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, only competitors right now racing to Mars would be China. Blue Origin is just so far behind. And the resources on Mars that SpaceX and Tesla could accrue have no effect on the GDP of America, so they shouldn't be too concerned. However, if they start shipping humans over to Mars, then your GDP starts to get affected because you're taking away workers. But as we transition to AI, I mean, that's not really going to cause much of an effect. So it's really interesting. And you brought up X and that's use in Mars. And I read yesterday that Bill Ackman is hoping to take X public with Elon, but he has not approached Elon yet. If X was to go public, do you think you would start a position in your portfolio, and why?
100%. And I don't even care what the valuation is. So if you've read the biography, you know that Kimball said that Twitter is a pimple on the ass of Elon Musk's potential impact on the future of humanity. And I understand exactly why he says that. And I 100% disagree. I think that the institutions that have been architected, that have brought us to the point that we are completely incapable of continuing to shepherd the light of human consciousness into the 21st century. Martin Gurry wrote an incredible book called Revolt of the Public that kind of digs into some of the specific mechanics of what I'm talking about. But the example that he uses was the fact that when the printing press was invented, that ended up catalyzing the 30 Years' War. And there was unprecedented levels of conflict and destruction that the entire continent of Europe underwent, because really, at the end of the day, all of that conflict centered on the shift in the media landscape, the information landscape, the technology landscape that all of those social structures had been built on. And I think we're in the midst of a similar level magnitude landscape shift today with the internet. So all the populism that we're seeing, a lot of the things that people intuitively feel that are just wrong going on in society, but we don't really have good names for them or good solutions for them, are all rooted in this fact that we cannot continue to rely on social technologies, which is what our institutions are, whether that's governmental, whether that's non-government agencies, whether that's businesses, like all of these things that were constructed with technology that predated the internet need to be re-architected in light of the internet, because the internet changes everything at the substrate level. One of the cool things about X and what Elon is doing with it is that, that freedom of speech piece of the core values of our founding fathers in this nation, that is an incredible and difficultly won innovation in social technology. And if we don't carry that forward into whatever that we build in the digitally native future, if we dispense with free speech, I'm afraid that society as we know it takes a much darker turn. And so, while it's great for us to have a sustainable energy future and to be able to explore the galaxy, if we give up what it means to be human in our ability to, as individuals, seek after and search for the truth as best as we can without killing one another, then that's a scary future, not a hopeful one. And so X is Elon's answer to that question. I don't know that Kimball really understands the importance of this argument. And while on the one hand, it is kind of for the lulz on Elon's part, and he is kind of rambunctious, it actually is really important. And so, from the freedom of speech standpoint, I think X is incredibly important. And then beyond freedom of speech, it's also important because it is one of the few platforms in what he's building that actually is a multimedia enabled public town square. That it's not just, YouTube is strictly video, and it's primarily like now they're kind of going into a barbell. So you've got extreme short form content. You do have some mid long, and then you have like the long form content. But there's no text. And then it's not really an audio centric platform either. If you go over to Facebook, you can do things in multimedia. You do have text, you do have video. There's not really anything in the way of long form content, whether that's audio, video, or text, really. On X, you have long form video, short form video, you have audio, like the Spaces platform to be able to engage in discourse is an incredible asset for the X platform. You have obviously short form tweets, but then you have long form tweets. And hopefully, and even those, you can't get to like full in-depth essay or, book level there, but hopefully over time, they'll even create tools for creators to make that type of content. And each and every one of those different mediums for information to be communicated in is important and plays a role in the way that we build social structures and we interact with each other as humans. And so I'm really excited for the fact that X is kind of unique in its ability to be so fluent and capable in so many different areas all in one place. And then obviously, if X becomes essentially the WeChat of the West, there's a lot of economic potential. I think that what they have done from a cost cutting perspective, they've got the pace of innovation really fixed. I still think that they need to, and Elon agrees with this is going to happen over time. They need a fundamental rewrite of the entire foundational code base for X. The spaghetti code that Twitter had developed was basically useless. And so we have to figure out how to maintain the user base and some of the core set of functionalities, but then re-architect everything underneath that. And then once that's done, continue to build out all these new functions and capabilities. But as it does that, it's going to be like the TAM of X is information exchange between humans, including value as one of those forms of information. That is, once again, one of those huge TAMs, going back to the beginning of our conversation, that I think has tons of legs for growth. And, I'm 100% sold on Elon's ability to manage that growth and that transition. And we also know that X is going to be part of the development of AI in the ecosystem of what Elon is doing as well. So, yeah, for all those reasons, I'm really excited about it. Honestly, X is the platform that has had, like, I don't have a Tesla yet. I own shares in Tesla. I have wealth that's attached to Tesla, but I don't own the products yet. I would love to. I'm not in a position to yet. Same thing for SpaceX. I will own Starlink at some point, but I don't yet. I use X on a daily basis. And I think that X is going to be a much more central piece of my life and my livelihood as a creator moving forward than Tesla or SpaceX are going to be. And so it's more directly connected to my life and the impact that it has on my life than any of those other companies as well. And so even for just that reason, it's also a no-brainer for me to be an owner of the platform that I'm going to be using to make a living and interact with people.
Yeah, and people say that, $44 billion for X was expensive, but then you compare it to Facebook and Meta and Instagram, which is worth what, $600 billion. It was worth $1 trillion at one point. And when you reason by analogy and compare those two, I think going forward, what X offers is becoming more valuable with all the censorship going on. I live in Canada, and they just released a new note saying that as a podcaster, I'm now
I'm
going to have
sorry.
I'm not going to have to sign something saying that I'm going to allege with some rules or something. Like, I'm scared to even be talking about it right now and uploading this to YouTube, to be honest with you. And now they're, I don't know if you saw, but you're on Instagram, you're not allowed to look at certain news sources on Instagram, like CNN, you're not allowed to look at, or the Financial Times. And so on X, you have people delivering news in real time, and more journalists are starting their own platforms. And I think X is the primary platform that they're going to consider. And then you have Spaces, which Spaces has provided me more value lately than any other platform possible, because even in the Tesla community, the fact that you can jump on a space and have 500 brains come together and discuss a topic, you learn so fast compared to even this. Like, this is just two heads talking. And so the viewers of this probably are better off going in a space. But I think X is a tremendous opportunity. And when you compare its valuation to Facebook's, I think what Elon does at a company, and we've seen it time and time again, if I had the opportunity to buy Twitter stock at $40 billion, I would probably make a sizable chunk of my portfolio to that. I mean, it's tough because I've got to sell Tesla to do so, but I think I would definitely buy a little bit of it for sure.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I would probably put the majority of my, it's an interesting question. How much of my Tesla would I be willing to sell to purchase X at any valuation? It would definitely be a lot, just based on my understanding. Sell at least half, if not more, of my Tesla position to do that, convert it over.
And you touched on X being, I mean, it's so much data, and with LLMs getting bigger and bigger, I think X can make a huge amount of money offering their tweets as a training set for other companies wanting to train LLMs. But because before they were scraping, but Elon's done a great job at preventing other companies from scraping their data. And I've actually noticed ChatGPT get significantly worse. I'm just using the free version, and it's really good at answering like artistic questions and giving you ideas, but it only has data going to September 2021 for me. And so there's so many things that it doesn't know that I've found. Have you found that?
Yeah, so I use Barely AI, which is they pull in the free version of ChatGPT. There's also a paid version, so you can get more up to date stuff. But they also have some other things in there, and I've noticed that as well. I do know that if you actually use Bing and use ChatGPT in the form of Bing Chat, that even the free version of that actually has access to a lot more up to date information than if you just use OpenAI's version of free ChatGPT. So that's one thing that you could definitely have access to if you'd like to get more up to date information.
So I want to talk about full self driving, because we got that really exciting live stream from Elon about a month ago, and we've learned a lot, especially even seeing that Optimus video last week. That was kind of a taste for how FSD is starting to become trained. And I found it interesting how over the last 5 or 6 years, FSD was being trained one way. And then I can't remember the name of the engineer who thought to use LLM technology to start to train FSD, as we learned in the biography. But why do you
I think
think
it
that?
was Deval Shroff, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
Shroff. Why do you think that other companies are not also changing to this approach? And why do you think that Elon wasn't the one who came up with it? And it almost seemed from the biography that Elon had like given up on FSD in a way. And it seemed like that was weird, because every year he was saying they're about to solve it. And so then when this guy Shroff came about, it seemed like Elon was excited about FSD again, and they started accruing a lot more resources to it. Did you have any thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I had a little bit different interpretation. So the method that Deval was proposing is called end to end, and it's training sorry, it's not, it's end-to-end inference on. So that in the car, the sensor suite takes in information, it feeds that directly from the sensors into a neural net, and then the neural net does everything to process that information and convert it into control outputs for the car. And end-to-end has been, so there's a couple forms of end-to-end. That's end-to-end inference, and then there's also end-to-end training, which is a whole different beast. This is a set of approaches in building artificial intelligence that's been around for a while. And one of the cool use cases to understand it and kind of get some exposure to the ideas is if you go back and research DeepMind and how they developed AlphaGo, and then that morphed over time into what's called MuZero. And so I won't explain all of that here, but for anyone who's interested in understanding that, that's what I would recommend. So, as a high level overview, they started out building a system that had a lot of human written code on how to play Go, and everything was trained on data that was generated by humans. So that was the first version of AlphaGo, and it's a clunky architecture that had some strengths and some weaknesses. And when it actually beat Lee Sedol originally, that was a very impressive feat, but that was only the beginning of DeepMind's ability to play Go at the highest levels. They then progressed from there into systems that were entirely trained by simulations of the game. And so there was no human games that it was played on. It was, so AlphaZero, if I understand this correctly, they gave their neural net the rules of the game, and then they told it to play, and it just played as many, like billions and billions of games. It learned the strategies itself. It fully explored the possibility space of how to play the game. And that system was then able to completely crush the AlphaGo version. They then actually went on from there to MuZero, which they didn't even give it the rules, and then they used the same architecture to play other games. So when you don't have the rules baked in at the beginning of the system, then the system is adaptable to different games and different simulations. And that MuZero version was actually able to outcompete AlphaZero as well. And so that is the transition from a patchwork block architecture of an artificially intelligent system to what is an end-to-end trained neural net. Not just inference, but actual end-to-end trained, because they did all of the neural net was tuned entirely by the neural net itself, just running recursively. There was no input from humans that give it the data. They set up the rules of how the training is going to work, and then it just crunches away on the problem and spits out on the other end a system that is basically God level capable. Who's the George Hotz? He has talked about this pretty extensively, and he was proposing that this is the approach that Tesla should take back in 2018, I think. MuZero was already a thing at that point in time. It had basically been proven from a theoretical standpoint, the power of end-to-end training and even end-to-end inference. For people who don't know, George Hotz was actually approached to run the Tesla Autopilot team by Elon, and they did not come to an agreement on the compensation or the incentive package that it would take to get George Hotz to do that. Essentially, if I understand the story correctly, Elon wanted to penalize George for every, he wanted him to complete the whole system. There were certain performance requirements, and he wanted him to do it within a year or something. It was a relatively short time frame. And then he wanted to penalize George for every month he was late on that. And George was like, no. But anyways, that was the approach that he was interested in taking. This has been out there, and Andrej Karpathy has talked about this for a long time, that they were aware of this thing. The problem is that, Go is a very simple game with very simple rules, and it's easy to simulate, and it's not the real world. It does not have the degrees of freedom that the real world has, even though Go has way more degrees of freedom than lots of other games. It's still tiny in comparison to the number of degrees of freedom and just possibilities that we face in the real world on a day-to-day basis. And so it was really hard to build FSD either with end-to-end inference or end-to-end training when Tesla got started. They needed to collect a lot of real-world data. They had to build the data engine, and that's what Andre really did, is he architected their data engine and their process to be able to start accumulating all the pieces and the resources that were necessary in order to go this direction. And from what I understand, there have been efforts to pursue end-to-end inference solutions in the past, and they just didn't meet with any success when they were tried. And so my read of the situation is that Deval tried to approach end-to-end again, that this isn't the first time that end-to-end inference had been tried within Tesla Autopilot, but that it had never worked in the past, and that he was the one to try it again. And finally, the rest of the system around it was at a level of maturity that it actually began to work. And so it's not that he's the first person to try end-to-end inference, he's the first person to see success with it. And then that is also what you see when, if what I'm understanding you're saying correctly is like Elon being excited about it again, as evidenced by the amount of compute training that they are allocating to this. Well, it depends on like your vision of how the system gets solved, because one of the things was with AlphaGo was better than a human with the non-end-to-end system. And so if you think that FSD is going to get better than a human with a non-end-to-end system, then the compute budget that you need to solve that problem is way more expensive to train mu0 than it was to train the original AlphaGo. It took way more compute resources to do that. So if you think you can get better with the human without going all the way to end-to-end training, then you just don't need as much compute. But when you realize that the end-to-end system is working and that it's actually shorter to go end-to-end inference and to solve the problem that way than it is to continue to push away at the patchwork block system that you have, well, then you need a different fundamental architecture. You need more compute. And so I think it's just a signal that, it's never that he was not excited about FSD and that he wasn't pushing forward. It's that, they're exploring the forest, the dark forest, as I think Andre likes to, or no, it's James Dalma who talks about this, that, you're wandering around in a forest, it's dark outside, you're kind of bumping into all kinds of things and you don't know what's going to, like, where the way out is. And then you reach a clearing and now all of a sudden you see the path ahead of you. And so that's kind of like what that moment was with Deval, is that they see, oh, here's this is the next leg of growth. And we're going to go all in this direction. And so if we're going all in this direction, now we have to change some things about how we're solving the problem. But we know that's the right thing for this stage in the development, and we're just going to go all in that direction.
Thank you. Yeah, and you're actually right. The more that I think about it, the more there was evidence that Elon has been excited throughout the years, because he's been pushing for no pedals and no steering wheel for actually several years now. And Franz says in the biography that they would always just make another version that defied what he wanted, and a more normal version just in case it didn't pan out, because he set such crazy deadlines. And a question I have for you is that Tesla Semi doc came out yesterday with Jay Leno, and I was thinking that the Tesla Semi is probably going to need a new neural network that is just trained on footage from the Tesla Semi, because you probably can't just take footage from a Model 3 and train it on a Tesla Semi, because it's got these huge limbs to worry about. And so how long after Tesla Semi is in volume production do you think that they could train it knowing what they know now? And do you think that it does need its own footage like I suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually wondered about this a lot. So even for how long we'll get clues to this on how long it takes them to roll out FSD for the Cybertruck, because the Cybertruck is a different profile camera placement is different. It's not going to be nearly as different as the Semi is going to be. But yeah, if you're training on photons in to controls out and you change the photons in part, so even like hardware 4, it's taking longer for hardware 4 to reach the same level of functionality that hardware 3 has. And it goes back to that exact same problem. You're changing the photons in. And so there has to be some adjustment in the system in order for that neural net to be able to process a different sensor suite input and convert it into the desired control output. So there.
Sorry, Hans. When you say photons in, are you referring to the amount of pixels? Because there's more pixels in hardware 4 that are, because I know that
it's a different camera sensor. And so each sensor interprets the light that it is. So yes, there are more pixels, but also like the color of if you are to use, 2 different cameras on your phone, they're going to have different quality. The scene is going to look different to 2 different camera sensors. And so like if you change out a Galaxy, S5 camera for an iPhone 15 camera, those pictures, even if you took the exact same picture of the exact same subject and the exact same lighting and everything, and like you feed those and you look at them as a human, you can tell that there's differences. Like it's the same scene, but it looks different. And so the same thing is going to be true. The hardware 4 sensor suite is a different set of camera sensors than the hardware 3 suite. And so that's, they're already having to tackle this problem in the hardware 3 to hardware 4 challenge. They're having to tackle it in releasing the Cybertruck. And so as they do that, they're going to have to create a system that allows them to swap out the sensors at the edge of the system and have some sort of module, like have an interface between the core logic of FSD and the specific camera sensors and placements for the actual vehicles. And then, if they solve that for Cybertruck, if they solve that for Semi, if they solve that for hardware 3 versus hardware 4, if they solve that for additional permutations of whatever vehicle, the Model 2, the Robotaxi, with or without steering wheel and pedals, then hopefully they can, in doing that, develop a modular enough approach that down the road you can throw a sensor suite onto a non-Tesla EV or most likely EV, and then you could actually put the FSD computer in it and it could actually drive that vehicle. There are some accommodations that have to be made for it to go into a different vehicle. But if you develop a system that's modular enough to cover all models of current Teslas, and then you focus on making the modularity of that system robust enough to work outside of just Tesla, then that actually creates a huge potential to license FSD for other customers and to extend the ability of EVs to supplant ICE traveled miles.
Yeah, it really seems like the path to being 10 times better than a human driver is laid out for us now. And Elon says it's going to be the greatest asset value in history. And when I go back to like 2019 when we were hearing about it and it was still a long ways away, but it felt like it was just around the corner, I kind of had to like think about things from a first principles perspective. And I had to try and think, okay, physically, is it possible for a robot to drive itself? And I feel like I'm not even asking that question anymore. But the way I would think about it in the past was I was like, okay, humans have sleepwalked before and gotten in their cars and while they were sleeping, driven to the store. And I'm like, okay, if humans can drive simply on their subconscious while they're asleep, then surely a robot that's trained on mass amounts of data will be able to drive as well. And was there any thought experiments that you had to come up with to try to convince yourself that long-term this was going to be a good investment, that FSD was going to get solved?
I've never done anything nearly that interesting. I actually do love that example. One of the things that I did go through just to solidify the investment case in my mind was to think about, based on the rate of improvement that we're seeing in the system and its functionality, like it has not stopped. There's no, if you look at the graph of like capability, it does appear to be an exponential curve that is curving upwards. Now, it hasn't reached the place that we wanted it to yet, but it's continuing to progress. And so I thought about that and I was like, okay, as long as they continue to progress, even if they never get to level 5 and it's never a robo taxi, is there economic value that can be derived from an incredible advanced driver assist system? And the answer to that is actually yes. And so, that's kind of my fallback case, is that I think that there's probably billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of market value in the 2030s to 2040s just from really, really good ADAS that is not necessarily level 5. And when I think about that and I look at the technology that Tesla is developing and its generality, its scalability, and how that actually far surpasses anything that someone like Waymo or Cruise or any of these companies are doing, I'm like, okay, even if they don't create quote unquote robo taxis, there's a lot of value that is in the technology that they're building. And there's lots of historical examples of all kinds of technology that we use today that was developed as part of things that NASA was doing. NASA was pushing the envelope on what was possible in space, and then we actually received a whole bunch of commercial benefits from that here on Earth. I think that what Tesla's doing in their drive towards fully autonomous transport is a similar type of effort, as far as pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But it's inside of a company that's already oriented to capture economic value based on the technological progress it's able to make. So I think they're going to do that regardless. And I think that that's mispriced in the marketplace based on the current valuation. Obviously, not financial advice.
Well, Hans, this has been an absolute pleasure. This was extremely fun. I love having conversations like these, and you happen to be the first, and so thank you for that. I think you have an incredibly bright future. You could have talked, I bet, for another 4 hours about this stuff, and you seem to really know your stuff. And so if you guys aren't following Hans on Twitter, you can see his handle there. It's Hans C. Nelson, and you should also subscribe to him on YouTube because he posts all sorts of conversations like this. And is there any final thoughts that you have, Hans?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for having me here. I love the conversation today. And, anyone, if you don't know Jacob, he's got a great channel. He thinks well. I've been very impressed by the content that you make. I love the way that you think about things. I'm impressed with the level of understanding that you have. And the way that you package the information that you do is also really good. So yeah, subscribe. You're obviously here at the YouTube channel, but you can also find him on Twitter at Tesla Jill, and you should definitely do that.
Thanks, Hans. All right. Thanks, everybody.